Amara Okonkwo's father's company collapsed overnight, leaving millions in debt to Korea's most ruthless CEO, Park Jin-woo. His terms were brutal. Marry him for 3 years to settle the debt, or he'd destroy what remained of her family. She agreed to save them. On their wedding night, he stood in the doorway of their penthouse and said coldly, "You'll call me sir from now on. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." She had no idea his control would become her obsession. Amara Okonkwo stood in the bride's preparation room of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, and tried to understand how her life had gone from normal to completely surreal in less than 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a marketing manager at a tech startup in Lagos, Nigeria, living in a nice apartment in Victoria Island, planning a vacation to Zanzibar with friends, living a completely ordinary and satisfying life. She'd had a career she enjoyed, a social life she valued, a family she loved, and a future that looked bright and full of possibilities. Then her father's company had collapsed. Okonkwo Industries had been a successful import-export business for 30 years, built from nothing by her father's hard work and business acumen. It employed over 200 people, supported dozens of families, and had made the Okonkwo family wealthy and respected in Lagos business circles. Amara had grown up comfortable. Private schools, university education in London, international travel, the kind of privileged life that came from having successful, hard-working parents. And then, in one catastrophic week, everything had fallen apart. Her father had made a business deal with a Korean conglomerate, Park Industries, owned and operated by CEO Park Jin-woo. The deal involved importing Korean electronics and machinery into West African markets, with Okonkwo Industries serving as the exclusive distributor. It had seemed like a huge opportunity, a chance to expand into new markets and new product lines. Her father had been excited, energized, talking about the future of the company with more enthusiasm than Amara had heard from him in years. But there had been problems with the contracts. Clauses her father's lawyers had either missed or misunderstood, terms that heavily favored Park Industries, penalty fees for failing to meet certain sales targets that were unrealistically high. Within 6 months, Okonkwo Industries was hemorrhaging money, unable to meet the contractual obligations, drowning in penalty fees that compounded monthly. Her father had tried to renegotiate. He'd flown to Seoul twice to meet with Park Jin-woo personally, to explain the situation, to ask for more reasonable terms. Both times, he'd been refused. Park Jin-woo had been cold, inflexible, unmoved by pleas for mercy or fairness. The contract was the contract. The penalties were clearly stated. Okonkwo Industries owed Park Industries approximately $47 million in accumulated penalties, unpaid invoices, and contract violation fees. Pay the debt or face legal action that would seize all company assets, all family assets, and likely result in criminal charges for fraud and breach of contract under international business law. Her father couldn't pay. Liquidating everything the family owned, the company, their houses, their cars, their investments, everything, wouldn't even cover half the debt. They were completely, utterly ruined. And then Park Jin-woo had made an offer. He would forgive the entire debt under one condition. Amara would marry him and remain his wife for a minimum of 3 years. It would be a legitimate legal marriage under both Korean and international law. She would live with him in Seoul, maintain the appearance of a proper wife, and fulfill certain obligations he would specify. After 3 years, he would grant her a divorce. The debt would be considered fully paid, and her family would be free from any further obligation. Why me? Amara had asked when her father first told her about this impossible offer, sitting in her parents' Lagos home that would soon be seized by creditors. Why would he want to marry me? He's never even met me. This doesn't make any sense. I don't know his reasons, her father had said, looking older and more defeated than Amara had ever seen him. I only know that this is his offer. Marry him for 3 years, or we lose everything, and I potentially go to prison for fraud. I told him absolutely not, that I would never sell my daughter to pay a business debt. But he said to ask you anyway. He said the choice should be yours, not mine. So I'm asking, but I want you to know you don't have to do this. We'll find another way. We'll declare bankruptcy. We'll fight the charges. We'll survive somehow. There is no other way, Amara had said quietly, understanding the impossible situation they were in. If there was another way, you would have found it by now. This is the only option that saves you from prison and saves the employees who depend on the company. So I'll do it. I'll marry him. Amara, no. I won't let you sacrifice yourself like this. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do this. For you, for Mama, for our family, for the 200 people who work for Okonkwo Industries and their families who depend on those jobs. 3 years of my life in exchange for all of that? It's not even a difficult choice. 3 years married to a man you don't know, living in a foreign country, trapped in a loveless arrangement. That's not a small sacrifice. It's 3 years, Papa. I'm 28 years old. 3 years from now, I'll be 31. Still young, still able to restart my life and career, still able to eventually find love and have a family if that's what I want. This isn't a death sentence. It's just a detour, an unpleasant one, but temporary. So she'd agreed. She'd signed the contracts, pages and pages of legal documents, in English and Korean, specifying exactly what this arrangement entailed. She'd quit her job in Lagos. She'd packed 2 suitcases with clothes and personal belongings. She'd said goodbye to her friends, her life, everything familiar. And she'd flown to Seoul 3 days ago to marry a man she'd never met, had only seen in photographs and business articles online. Park Jin-woo was 36 years old, the CEO of Park Industries, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with operations across Asia, Africa, and increasingly in Western markets. He was the only son of the company's founder, had taken over as CEO at the unusually young age of 28 when his father died suddenly, and had grown the company's value by over 300% in the 8 years since. He was considered a business genius. Ruthless, strategic, absolutely focused on profit and growth above all other considerations. He was also, Amara had to admit, from the photographs she'd seen, extremely handsome. Tall for a Korean man at around 6 feet with sharp, angular features, dark, intense eyes, and the kind of presence that probably made people instinctively defer to him even before they knew who he was. In every photograph, he looked cold, controlled, serious, never smiling, never showing any emotion beyond professional focus. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would offer to marry a stranger to collect a business debt. They'd met for the first time yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the wedding. He'd sent a car to pick her up from the luxury hotel where Park Industries had housed her since her arrival in Seoul. She'd been driven to Park Industries headquarters, a gleaming glass and steel tower in Gangnam that screamed wealth and power. She'd been escorted to the top-floor executive suite, past numerous assistants and security, into an enormous corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul. Park Jin-woo had been sitting behind a massive desk made of what looked like black marble and steel, working on his computer. He'd looked up when she entered, his dark eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made her feel simultaneously evaluated and dismissed. "Miss Okonkwo," he'd said in English, with a noticeable but not heavy Korean accent. His voice was deep, controlled, absolutely devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." She'd sat in one of the expensive leather chairs across from his desk, feeling like she was attending a job interview rather than meeting her future husband. "I assume you've read and understood all the contracts you signed?" He'd continued without any small talk or pleasantries. "But I want to make certain expectations very clear before the wedding tomorrow. This is a business arrangement, not a love match. I need a wife for certain business and social purposes. You need your family's debt forgiven. We both benefit from this arrangement if we approach it professionally and maintain appropriate boundaries. Do you understand?" "I understand that this is transactional," Amara had said, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. "But I'd like to understand what exactly you expect from me beyond just the title of wife. What are my actual obligations? You will live in my home. You will accompany me to business and social events when I require your presence. You will behave as an appropriate wife in public, respectful, supportive, and presenting a united front. You will not embarrass the company or me through inappropriate behavior or public statements. In private, you will maintain your own space and your own life within the boundaries I establish. We will not have a romantic or sexual relationship unless you specifically request it, which I do not anticipate happening. After 3 years, I will grant you a generous divorce settlement in addition to your family's debt being cleared, and you will be free to return to Nigeria and resume your life. These are the basic parameters. Are they acceptable to you? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice. You could refuse right now and return to Lagos. Of course, your family would then face bankruptcy, and your father would likely face criminal charges. But that is still technically a choice you could make. I prefer employees and associates who understand they're making choices rather than believing they're being forced. It creates better working relationships. You consider this a working relationship? Our marriage? What else would it be? We're strangers entering a mutually beneficial business arrangement. I provide debt forgiveness. You provide the social and business benefits of having a wife. It's a transaction, Miss Okonkwo. A very expensive transaction that I'm making because it serves certain strategic purposes that are not your concern. But a transaction nonetheless. And after 3 years, we just end it? Get divorced? Go our separate ways? Precisely. Clean, simple, transactional. No messy emotions to complicate matters. No expectations beyond what's explicitly stated in the contracts. No pretense that this is anything other than what it actually is. You're very cold, Amara had observed. Not accusingly, but just stating a fact. I'm very clear about boundaries and expectations. Most people appreciate that clarity, even if they find it uncomfortable. Do you have any other questions about the arrangement? Just one. Why me specifically? Why did you offer this arrangement to my father? You could forgive the debt without demanding I marry you. You could find a wife through normal means if you need one for business purposes. Why structure it this way? For the first time, something that might have been actual emotion had flickered across Park Jin-woo's face. Something Amara couldn't quite read. That's not your concern. My reasons are my own. You simply need to decide if you're willing to accept the arrangement as structured. Are you? Yes. I'll marry you tomorrow and fulfill the terms of our agreement. For 3 years. And then I want my life back. Then we have an understanding. The wedding is tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Grand Hyatt. A car will collect you at 1 p.m. We'll have a small ceremony with minimal guests. Some business associates, a few family members on my side. Your family is, of course, welcome to attend if they can arrange travel on such short notice, though I understand that's unlikely given their current financial situation. They can't afford to fly to Seoul right now. I'll be alone. You'll have my family present. That's sufficient for the ceremony's purposes. After the wedding, we'll go directly to my home, where you'll be living. I'll show you your quarters and establish house rules. We'll have dinner together to maintain appearances for the staff, and then you'll be free to settle into your new accommodations. Any other questions? No. I think you've made everything very clear. Good. I appreciate efficiency and clear communication. I believe we'll work well together despite the unusual circumstances. That had been yesterday. Now it was today. 3 p.m. was approaching rapidly, and Amara was standing in a wedding dress she hadn't chosen herself, about to marry a cold, ruthless stranger to save her family from complete destruction. The wedding dress was beautiful, at least. Elegant white silk with delicate lace details, clearly expensive, perfectly fitted to her body. Park Jin-woo's assistant had arranged everything. The dress, the hair and makeup stylists who'd worked on her all morning, the flowers, the ceremony details. Amara had simply been told where to be and when, and had followed instructions like an obedient employee rather than a bride making her own wedding decisions. There was a knock on the preparation room door. "Miss Okonkwo? It's time." A woman's voice called in accented English. Amara took one last look at herself in the mirror. She looked beautiful, polished like a proper bride. But her eyes looked sad and resigned, like someone attending a funeral rather than a wedding. "This is just 3 years," she whispered to her reflection. 3 years and then you get your life back. You can do anything for 3 years. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief. Less than 30 people attended, mostly Park Jin-woo's business associates from what Amara could tell, a few older relatives who must have been his extended family, and various corporate executives who probably felt obligated to attend their CEO's wedding. Everyone was dressed formally and expensively, and the entire event had the atmosphere of a high-end business conference, rather than a joyful celebration of marriage. Park Jin-woo stood at the front of the ceremony space, looking exactly as cold and controlled as he had in his office yesterday. He wore an immaculate black tuxedo that probably cost more than Amara's parents' monthly mortgage payment back in Lagos. When she walked down the short aisle toward him, his expression didn't change at all. No smile, no warmth. No indication that he was pleased or even interested in the woman about to become his wife. The ceremony was conducted in both Korean and English by an officiant who seemed to be rushing through it as quickly as legally possible. They exchanged vows that were generic and impersonal, promising to honor and respect each other, to maintain their commitment for as long as the marriage endured. They exchanged rings, simple platinum bands that looked expensive but emotionally empty. And then the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Park Jin-woo leaned in to give her the briefest, most perfunctory kiss imaginable. Barely a brush of lips that lasted less than a second. "Congratulations," he murmured so quietly only she could hear. "You're now Mrs. Park. Try to look happier for the photographs." The reception was equally brief and businesslike. They stood together, accepting congratulations from guests who seemed more interested in networking with Park Jin-woo than in celebrating his marriage. They cut an elaborate wedding cake that Amara suspected neither of them would actually eat. They posed for professional photographs that would probably be used for business and social purposes. And then, after less than 2 hours total, it was over. "We're leaving now," Park Jin-woo informed her. The car's waiting. Say goodbye to anyone you wish, though I don't expect that will take long since you don't actually know anyone here. They were driven to his home in silence, a massive modern penthouse apartment occupying the entire top floor of one of Seoul's most exclusive residential towers in Hanamdong. The apartment was exactly what Amara expected. Enormous, expensively decorated, with minimalist modern furniture and original art. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of Seoul and the Han River. Everything speaking of wealth and power and cold perfection. Your quarters are this way, Park Jin-woo said, walking through the massive open living space toward a hallway that led to what appeared to be the bedroom wing. He opened a door to reveal a large, beautifully appointed bedroom with an attached bathroom and a small sitting area. This is your private space. The bathroom is fully stocked with toiletries and necessities. Your clothes from your hotel have been unpacked and put away. You'll find additional clothing in the closet that I had purchased for you based on your measurements. Business attire, casual wear, and formal wear for events. If anything doesn't fit properly, inform my assistant, and she'll arrange adjustments. This is very nice. Thank you. It's adequate for your needs. My bedroom is at the opposite end of the apartment. We each have our own private spaces. The kitchen, living areas, dining room, and home office are shared spaces. My housekeeper, Mrs. Cho, comes daily, Monday through Friday, to clean and prepare meals. On weekends, we're responsible for ourselves unless I specifically request her presence. There's a home gym, a media room, and a library that you're welcome to use at your convenience. Are there any questions so far? Just one. What exactly are the house rules you mentioned yesterday? Ah, yes, the rules. Park Jin-woo's expression became, if possible, even colder and more formal. First, you will address me as Sir in private and Jin-woo, or Darling, in public, as appropriate for maintaining appearances. I prefer clear hierarchy and formality in business relationships. And this arrangement is a business relationship regardless of the marriage certificate. Second, you will maintain appropriate behavior and appearance at all times. You represent the company and me now. Third, you will not bring friends or family to this apartment without my explicit prior permission. This is my private space, and I control who enters it. Fourth, you will accompany me to any business or social events I deem necessary, with appropriate notice provided. Fifth, you will not discuss the nature of our arrangement with anyone. Publicly, we are a normal married couple. Sixth, you will respect my privacy and my space. Do not enter my bedroom, my private office, or disturb me when I'm working unless specifically invited or in case of a genuine emergency. Are these rules clear and acceptable? Amara stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. You want me to call you, sir? Like you're my boss or my superior? I am your superior in this arrangement. You are here because I'm forgiving a $47 million debt in exchange for your presence and service as my wife. That creates a clear power dynamic that we should acknowledge honestly rather than pretending we're equals in this relationship. Calling me sir reinforces that dynamic and maintains appropriate boundaries. This is insane. We're married. I'm your wife, not your employee. You're my wife in name and legal status only. In practical terms, you are something between an employee and a very expensive acquisition. I paid $47 million to obtain you for 3 years. That makes you an asset I'm managing, not an equal partner. I prefer honesty about power dynamics over comfortable fictions. So yes, you'll call me sir in private. In public, you'll use my name or appropriate terms of endearment to maintain the appearance of a normal marriage. But here, in private, where we can be honest about what this actually is, you'll acknowledge the reality of our arrangement. Is that clear? Crystal clear. You're a controlling, cold, arrogant man who views people as transactions and assets rather than as human beings. I'm so glad I agreed to marry you. This is going to be a wonderful 3 years. For the first time since she'd met him, Park Jin-woo smiled, a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach his eyes. I appreciate sarcasm. It demonstrates intelligence and spirit, but it doesn't change the basic facts of our arrangement or the rules I've established. You'll call me sir from now on, Mrs. Park. Get used to it. He left her alone in her new bedroom, closing the door quietly behind him. Amara sat on the edge of the expensive bed in her wedding dress, still wearing her shoes and jewelry, and tried very hard not to cry. She'd expected this to be difficult. She'd known that marrying a stranger to pay off her father's debt would be uncomfortable and emotionally challenging. But she hadn't expected to feel quite this dehumanized, quite this much like an object that had been purchased and was now being stored in an appropriate location until needed. 3 years. She had to survive 3 years of this. 3 years of living with a man who viewed her as an expensive acquisition rather than a person. 3 years of calling him sir and following his rules and maintaining appearances and pretending this was a normal marriage when it was actually a prison sentence with expensive furniture. She could do this. She had to do this. Her family's entire future depended on her ability to endure 3 years of Park Jin-woo's cold, controlling, dehumanizing treatment. She just hoped she would still recognize herself when those 3 years were finally over. The first week of married life was exactly as awful as Amara had anticipated. Park Jin-woo maintained rigid control over every aspect of their shared existence. He woke at precisely 5:30 every morning, spent 90 minutes in his home gym, showered and dressed in his private quarters, and was eating breakfast by 7:30. Amara was expected to join him for breakfast, their only mandatory shared meal of the day, where they ate in near silence while he read news on his tablet, and she tried not to feel completely awkward about the whole situation. "Good morning, sir," she'd force herself to say each morning, hating how subservient it sounded but knowing he'd correct her if she didn't follow his rules. "Good morning," he'd reply without looking up from his tablet. "You have a wardrobe fitting at 10 a.m. today with the personal stylist I've hired. She'll be creating a complete professional wardrobe for you, appropriate for your role as my wife at various business and social events. After the fitting, you're free until dinner at 7 p.m. I'll be at the office until at least 9 or 10 tonight, so don't wait up." "Do you always work such late hours?" "When necessary, which is most days." "Why do you ask?" "Just making conversation, trying to understand your schedule and routines." "My schedule and routines are not your concern unless they directly impact something I need from you. Otherwise, use your time as you see fit within the boundaries I've established." Every conversation went like this: cold, transactional, him providing information only as necessary, and showing absolutely no interest in her as a person beyond her role in maintaining appearances. He never asked about her life in Lagos, her interests, her career before this arrangement. He never made small talk or tried to make her feel comfortable. He simply treated her exactly like what he'd said she was: an expensive asset he'd acquired for specific purposes and now needed to manage efficiently. The wardrobe fitting he'd arranged was both humiliating and surreal. The personal stylist, an elegant Korean woman in her 40s named Kim Mi-young, had brought dozens of outfits for Amara to try on. Designer business suits, elegant cocktail dresses, formal gowns, casual but expensive everyday wear. Everything was beautiful and clearly cost a fortune. Mr. Park has very specific ideas about how his wife should present herself. Mi Young explained in excellent English as she supervised Amara trying on various outfits. He wants you to look polished, elegant, successful, like someone who belongs next to one of Asia's most powerful CEOs. These clothes are all appropriate for various situations you'll encounter as Mrs. Park. Park will review photographs of each outfit and approve or reject them based on whether they meet his standards. He's going to approve my clothing? I'm a grown woman. I've been dressing myself successfully for 28 years. Mr. Park is very particular about image and appearance. Everything and everyone associated with him must meet his standards. This is simply how he operates. I've been dressing his executives and associates for years. It's best to simply accept his input rather than fighting it. It makes everything easier. So Amara spent 4 hours being dressed and photographed like a doll, while Mi Young took hundreds of photos to send to Park Jin-woo for his approval. It was degrading and dehumanizing. But she gritted her teeth and endured it because fighting would just prolong the process. That evening at dinner, another silent, awkward meal where they sat at opposite ends of a dining table that could seat 12 people. Park Jin-woo finally spoke beyond basic pleasantries. I reviewed the wardrobe photographs. Most of the selections are acceptable. I've sent notes to Mi Young about adjustments needed to a few items. You'll have another fitting next week to finalize everything. We have a business dinner this Friday evening, a social event with several of my major investors and their wives. You'll need to attend with me. Mi Young will prepare you appropriately. I expect you to be charming, intelligent, supportive, and to represent me well. Can you do that? Can I be charming and intelligent? Yes, surprisingly, I possess those qualities naturally. Whether I'll choose to use them on your behalf is another question. You'll choose to use them because that's what you agreed to do when you signed the contracts. Behaving as an appropriate wife in public was explicitly stated as one of your obligations. I'm simply informing you of a specific upcoming situation where that obligation will be tested. I assume you'll meet expectations. Am I wrong to assume that? No, you're not wrong. I'll be appropriately charming and supportive at your business dinner. I'll smile and make small talk and pretend we have a normal marriage. I'll do exactly what you paid $47 million for me to do. Good. I appreciate clarity and follow-through on commitments. As a reward for your anticipated cooperation, you may use one of the company credit cards I've provided to purchase anything you need: books, personal items, entertainment, whatever you want within reason. Consider it a performance bonus for meeting basic expectations. How generous. A performance bonus for behaving like a trained SEAL. I'm so grateful. Your sarcasm is noted but irrelevant. The offer stands regardless of your attitude about it. Use the card or don't. That's your choice. But the opportunity is available if you want it. The business dinner on Friday was Amara's first real test of her ability to play the role of Mrs. Park convincingly in public. Mi Young came to the apartment that afternoon to prepare her. Doing her hair and makeup, dressing her in an elegant navy blue cocktail dress and expensive jewelry, coaching her on appropriate behavior and topics of conversation. Mr. Park's investors are very important to him, Mi Young explained as she worked. Be polite, gracious, and interested in what they say. Ask about their businesses, their families. Compliment the wives on their appearance or jewelry. Show deference to Mr. Park in public, touch his arm occasionally, look at him adoringly when appropriate, laugh at his jokes even if they're not funny. Make everyone believe you're a devoted wife who's completely in love with him. That's your role tonight. I'm supposed to look adoringly at a man who makes me call him sir and treats me like an expensive possession? In public, yes. That's literally your job. What happens in private between you two is none of my business. But in public, you must maintain the fiction of a happy marriage. Park's reputation and business relationships depend on it. So Amara plastered on a smile, put on her metaphorical armor, and accompanied Park Jin-woo to an exclusive restaurant in Gangnam, where they met 8 of his investors and their wives for an elaborate multi-course dinner. And she performed her role flawlessly. Charming, intelligent, appropriately deferential to her husband, making everyone believe she was a happily married woman who adored the cold, controlling man sitting next to her. Park Jin-woo played his role perfectly too. In public, he was attentive in a way he never was in private, pulling out her chair, touching her back or shoulder occasionally, including her in conversations, even smiling at her a few times in a way that almost looked genuine. To any outside observer, they appeared to be a successful, attractive couple who were genuinely happy together. It was all a complete lie, but they sold it perfectly. "You did very well tonight," Park Jin-woo said in the car on the way home after the dinner finally ended. It was the first compliment he'd given her since their arrangement began. Several of the investors commented to me that I'm lucky to have such a lovely and charming wife. "You played your role exactly as required. I'm satisfied with your performance." How wonderful. My husband is satisfied with my performance. That's exactly what every woman dreams of hearing. You know what I meant. You met expectations in a high-pressure situation. That deserves acknowledgement, even if you're going to be sarcastic about it. What I know is that I spent 3 hours pretending to adore a man who treats me like an employee and views our marriage as a business transaction. That's emotionally exhausting, regardless of how well I performed the role. So forgive me if I'm not gracefully accepting your compliment about my satisfactory performance as an acquired asset. They rode the rest of the way home in silence. When they arrived at the penthouse, Park Jin-woo went directly to his private office without another word, and Amara went to her bedroom, kicked off her expensive shoes, and lay on her bed still wearing her dress and jewelry, staring at the ceiling and wondering how she was going to survive 3 years of this without completely losing herself. 2 months into the marriage, something shifted between them in ways Amara didn't expect or fully understand at first. She'd settled into the routines of her new life. The silent breakfasts, the occasional business and social events where she played her role as devoted wife. The long stretches of time where she had nothing to do except read books and watch television and explore Seoul alone because Park Jin-woo was constantly working. It was lonely and boring and emotionally empty, but it was also survivable. She'd learned to numb herself to the dehumanizing aspects of the arrangement, to simply go through the motions without thinking too hard about what she was doing or why. But then Park Jin-woo got sick. He never got sick, apparently. In the 2 months she'd lived with him, he'd maintained his rigid schedule without deviation. Up at 5:30, gym until 7, breakfast at 7:30, office by 8:30, home by 10 p.m. at the earliest. He was like a machine, never showing weakness or vulnerability or any human limitation. Until one Thursday morning when he didn't appear for breakfast at 7:30. Amara waited 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. By 9 a.m. she was actually concerned. He'd never deviated from his schedule before. Something must be wrong. She approached his bedroom door, the sacred private space she'd been explicitly forbidden to enter except in emergencies, and knocked quietly. "Sir, are you all right? You missed breakfast and it's past 9 now. I'm just checking if everything is okay." No response. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Emergency, she decided. This qualified as a legitimate emergency that overrode his privacy rules. She opened the door. Park Jin-woo was in bed. unusual since she'd never seen him not dressed and ready to leave by 7:30, clearly ill. His face was flushed with fever, he was sweating, and even from the doorway she could hear his labored breathing. "I'm fine," he said weakly when he saw her in the doorway. "Just a minor illness. I'll be up and working soon. Go away." "You're clearly not fine. You have a high fever and you look terrible. Have you taken any medicine?" "I don't need medicine. I just need a few hours to recover. Close the door and leave me alone." Amara ignored this completely, walking into his room and pressing her hand against his forehead. He was burning up, probably 103 or 104 degrees. "You need medicine immediately. Probably a doctor too. Where do you keep your medical supplies?" "In the kitchen. Upper cabinet near the refrigerator. But I don't need you to take care of me. I can manage myself." "You can barely sit up. You're not managing anything. Just lie there and let me help you. We can argue about power dynamics and appropriate roles after you're not actively dying." She found fever reducers and pain medication in the kitchen, got a glass of water, returned to his bedroom, and made him take the medicine despite his weak protests. Then she got a cold, wet cloth and wiped down his face and neck to help reduce the fever. "You're violating the house rules," he mumbled, his eyes closed. "You're not supposed to be in my private space." "I'm violating the house rules to take care of my sick husband. Sue me. Actually, given our arrangement, you probably could sue me for breach of contract. But you'll have to wait until you're not feverish and incoherent to do it properly." She spent the entire day taking care of him, bringing medicine and water regularly, replacing cold compresses, making simple soup that he could barely eat, and monitoring his fever. She called Park Industries to inform his assistant that Mr. Park was ill and would not be coming to the office today, probably the first sick day he'd taken in years, based on how shocked his assistant sounded. By evening, the fever had broken slightly, down to about 101 instead of the terrifying 104 it had been that morning. Park Jin-woo was more alert, more aware of what was happening. "You stayed all day," he observed, his voice still weak but more normal than it had been. "You didn't have to do that. Mrs. Cho could have managed this when she arrived for work." "Mrs. Cho is 60 years old, and this isn't her responsibility. You're my husband, legally at least, even if not emotionally. Taking care of you when you're sick is actually a normal wife thing to do. I know normal isn't what we're going for here, but I figured I'd make an exception for serious illness." "Why? Why what? Why take care of me? I've treated you terribly since you arrived. I've dehumanized you, controlled you, made you call me sir like you're my subordinate rather than my spouse. You should hate me. You should have let me suffer. Why spend all day taking care of someone who's shown you nothing but coldness? Because you're a human being and you were sick and needed help. I'm not going to let someone suffer just because they're an asshole to me. That's not who I am. Also, pragmatically, if you died from this fever, my family's debt would not be considered paid, and they'd be right back where they started. So I have a vested interest in keeping you alive for at least 3 years. That's a very practical motivation. I'm a very practical person. Also, believe it or not, spending the day taking care of you reminded me that you're actually human under all the cold CEO armor. You're vulnerable and breakable just like everyone else. That makes you slightly more sympathetic as a person, even if you're still a controlling jerk about everything." Park Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for taking care of me today. For not letting me just suffer alone out of spite or indifference. I appreciate it more than my behavior toward you deserves." It was the first genuine thank you, the first real acknowledgement of her as a person, that he'd given since she arrived in Seoul. Amara felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the armor she'd built around her own heart to survive this arrangement. "You're welcome. Try to get some actual sleep now. I'll check on you in a few hours to make sure the fever hasn't come back. You don't have to keep monitoring me. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. There's a difference. Sleep." She left him to rest and returned to the living room, and realized something disturbing. She'd actually enjoyed taking care of him today. Not because she particularly liked him. She still found him cold and controlling and emotionally stunted. But because it had given her a purpose, a role that felt real rather than performative. She'd been needed today, genuinely needed, and that had felt good in a way nothing else in this sterile, empty arrangement had felt since she arrived. Over the following weeks, their relationship began to subtly shift in ways neither of them explicitly acknowledged, but both noticed. Park Jin-woo was still cold and controlling about most things. He still made her call him sir in private. He still maintained rigid rules about their arrangement and his expectations. But he also started occasionally asking her questions about herself. What she'd done that day, what book she was reading, whether she was adjusting okay to life in Seoul. Small questions that suggested actual interest in her as a person, rather than just as an asset he was managing. And Amara found herself answering honestly, telling him about her life before the arrangement, about her career in marketing that she'd been good at and enjoyed, about her family and friends back in Lagos that she missed terribly, about how isolating and lonely it was to be in a foreign country where she didn't speak the language and had no real connections. "You should make friends," he said one evening during another rare actual conversation over dinner. "You can't just sit in this apartment reading books for 3 years. That's not sustainable psychologically. Find activities, meet people, build a life here. I won't restrict that as long as you continue meeting your obligations to me. I don't know how to make friends in Seoul. I don't speak Korean. I don't know the culture. I don't know where to even start. There are expat communities, international women's groups, Korean language classes specifically for foreigners. My assistant can provide you with information on various organizations and activities if you're interested. I'd prefer you have your own life outside of this arrangement. It would make you more content, which would make you more effective in your role when I need you. Everything with you always comes back to my role and effectiveness. Can't you just suggest I make friends because isolation is psychologically unhealthy without relating it back to how useful I'll be to you?" I could say that. It would be the more emotionally appropriate phrasing. But it wouldn't be honest. I do think you should have friends and activities because isolation is unhealthy. But I'm also considering how your well-being impacts your ability to fulfill your obligations to me. Both things can be true simultaneously. I prefer honesty over comfortable lies. You and your brutal honesty about everything. Do you ever just say something kind without immediately pointing out your selfish motivations for it? Not usually. I find that clarity about motivations prevents misunderstandings and false expectations. People appreciate honesty even when they claim they prefer comfortable lies. Despite his continued emotional bluntness, Amara did follow his suggestion and started exploring Seoul more actively. She enrolled in Korean language classes specifically designed for expat spouses. She joined an international women's book club that met monthly. She started going to cultural events and museums and restaurants, slowly building a life that felt slightly more real than the empty existence she'd been living in the penthouse. And as she became less isolated and more content, she found herself less resentful about the overall arrangement. It was still not what she'd choose for herself. Park Jin-woo was still cold and controlling in ways that frustrated her. But it was survivable. More than survivable, even. It was becoming almost tolerable. 4 months into the marriage, Park Jin-woo surprised her completely by asking a personal question that had nothing to do with their arrangement or her obligations. They were having one of their silent breakfasts when he suddenly looked up from his tablet and said, "Why did you study marketing? What drew you to that career specifically?" Amara almost dropped her coffee cup in shock. He'd never asked her anything about her pre-arrangement life beyond basic factual information he needed for social situations. I liked the creativity of it, finding ways to tell stories about products and brands that made people care about them, understanding consumer psychology and using that understanding to build campaigns that resonated. It felt like a good combination of analytical thinking and creative expression. Why do you ask? Because I realized I know almost nothing about you beyond your name and your role in this arrangement. That seems like a significant oversight if we're going to be living together for 3 years. So I'm asking, tell me about yourself, your life before this, what you enjoyed, what you miss, who you were when you had control over your own choices. So Amara told him about growing up in Lagos in a comfortable middle-class family, about her university years in London studying business and marketing, about returning to Lagos after graduation and working her way up from junior marketing, assistant to marketing manager, over 6 years, about the campaigns she'd worked on that she was proud of, the colleagues she'd enjoyed, the life she'd been building before everything collapsed. You gave up a life you valued to save your family from consequences of your father's business mistakes, Park Jin-woo observed when she finished. That's a significant sacrifice. Do you resent him for putting you in this position? Sometimes, not most of the time. He didn't intend for any of this to happen. He was just trying to grow the business and got caught in contracts he didn't fully understand. But sometimes, yes, I resent him. I resent that my life got derailed because of his mistakes. I resent that I'm here in Seoul living with a stranger instead of in Lagos with my friends and my career. But I also love him, and I couldn't let him go to prison or lose everything he built. So here I am. Here you are, trapped in an arrangement you didn't want with a man who treats you like an expensive acquisition rather than a person. I imagine you resent me far more than you resent your father. Yes, I do. You could have forgiven the debt without demanding I marry you. You could have shown some mercy or compassion instead of being completely ruthless about extracting maximum value from someone else's misfortune. So yes, I resent you significantly. That's fair. I am ruthless about business. I do extract maximum value from situations. But I also want you to understand something that I've never explained because I didn't think you needed to know my motivations. Would you like to hear the actual reason I structured this arrangement the way I did? Yes, I would like to understand why you did this. Park Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm the sole heir to Park Industries. My father built the company from nothing, and when he died unexpectedly 8 years ago, I inherited it along with enormous pressure from the board, from our investors, from my extended family, to carry on the legacy. I've grown the company substantially since then, but I've also sacrificed everything personal for business growth. I have no life outside work, no real friends, just business associates. No romantic relationships, just occasional arrangements that are purely physical and temporary. No family except distant relatives I barely speak to. I'm 36 years old and completely, utterly alone because I've dedicated everything to maintaining and growing this empire." He paused, his expression difficult to read. 6 months ago, the board started pressuring me to marry, to find an appropriate wife from a good family who would produce heirs and provide stability. They suggested several candidates: Korean women from wealthy families, appropriate matches by every traditional measure. But I didn't want that. I didn't want a real marriage with someone who would expect love and emotional intimacy I'm not capable of providing. I didn't want to disappoint another person by being exactly who I am: cold, work-focused, and emotionally unavailable. And I definitely didn't want children who would grow up with an emotionally distant father, as I did. "So you found a way to have a wife without actually having a wife," Amara said, beginning to understand. "By making it a business arrangement with explicit terms and a clear end date." "Exactly. When your father's company defaulted on the contracts, I saw an opportunity. I could offer to forgive the debt in exchange for a temporary marriage that would satisfy the board and my family's pressure while maintaining clear boundaries about what the relationship actually was. You would get your family's debt forgiven. I would get the appearance of marriage without the emotional complications, and everyone would benefit. It was strategic and practical. But why me specifically? You could have found someone else to make this arrangement with, someone who wanted it, rather than someone who was desperate and had no real choice. Because I researched you extensively before making the offer. I read about your career, your accomplishments, and your reputation. I interviewed people who'd worked with you. And I learned that you were intelligent, capable, strong, someone who could potentially handle this arrangement without completely falling apart psychologically. Someone who had real-life experience and skills rather than just being a trophy to display. I didn't want a wife who would be useless beyond looking good at events. I wanted someone I could actually respect intellectually, even if the relationship was cold and transactional. That's not as terrible as I expected. Still selfish and manipulative, but at least there was actual reasoning beyond pure exploitation. I'm always selfish and manipulative. I'm honest about that. But I'm not casually cruel. I don't hurt people without reason. I structured this arrangement to benefit both of us within the constraints of what I'm capable of providing. Is it ideal? No. But it's honest. You know exactly what this is and what I am. There are no false promises or expectations. Doesn't that clarity have some value? Maybe. I'm still processing this information. Thank you for explaining. It helps to understand your actual motivations instead of just assuming you're a complete monster. I'm not a complete monster. Just a mostly emotionally unavailable workaholic who's very good at business and very bad at human relationships. Self-awareness is important. 6 months into the marriage, Amara realized she was starting to actually like Park Jin-woo despite his numerous flaws. He was still cold and controlling about many things. He still made her follow his rules, still treated their arrangement like a business contract. But he'd also started showing glimpses of actual humanity that made him more sympathetic. He asked about her day when they had dinner together. He noticed when she seemed upset and actually inquired about what was wrong. He'd even made a few dry jokes that were actually funny once you understood his sense of humor. "I think you're growing on me," she admitted one evening during one of their increasingly frequent actual conversations. "Like a fungus, slow, unwelcome at first, but eventually tolerable and maybe even slightly pleasant in small doses." That's the most backhanded compliment I've ever received. I appreciate it genuinely. You're growing on me as well. You're significantly more interesting than I anticipated when I first structured this arrangement. More intelligent, more resilient, more capable of actually challenging me intellectually. I'm enjoying our interactions far more than I expected to. Are you saying you actually like me? Your temporary contract wife? I'm saying you've become more than just an asset I'm managing. You've become someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with. Someone whose opinions I value. Someone who makes this apartment feel less empty when you're here. So yes, I suppose I like you, as much as I'm capable of liking anyone, which admittedly is limited. That's almost sweet, in a cold, emotionally stunted way. That's the most I'm capable of. Take it or leave it. I'll take it. It's more than I expected from you 6 months ago when you were making me call you sir and treating me like an expensive appliance. I still make you call me sir. I know, and I hate it slightly less now than I did then. Which is concerning. I might be developing Stockholm syndrome. Or you might be adapting to a difficult situation by finding positive aspects to focus on. That's healthy psychology, not Stockholm syndrome. 8 months into the marriage, something happened that changed their relationship fundamentally and irrevocably. They were attending another business event, a formal charity gala where Park Jin-woo was one of the major donors and expected to give a speech. Amara was dressed in an elegant, black gown that Mi Young had selected, playing her usual role as devoted wife. Standing beside Park Jin-woo as he networked with other wealthy business leaders. One of those business leaders, a man in his 60s named Chairman Lee, who ran a competing conglomerate, approached them with his wife. They made polite small talk about the charity, the event, and various business matters. And then Chairman Lee said something that made Amara's blood run cold. Park C. I heard a rumor that your marriage is not quite what it appears. That your wife is actually here to settle a business debt rather than for love. Is there any truth to that gossip? Park Jin-woo's expression didn't change at all. People love to speculate about others' private lives, especially when those people are successful and in the public eye. My wife and I are happily married. Anything else is simply a malicious rumor from competitors trying to damage my reputation. Of course. I meant no offense. I was simply curious about the unusual circumstances of your wedding. So sudden, so private. No one had even heard you were dating seriously. It raised questions. My private life is not subject to public scrutiny or explanation. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with some other guests before my speech. He guided Amara away smoothly, his hand firm on her lower back, maintaining perfect composure. But she could feel the tension in his body, could see the tight control in his expression. Are people gossiping about us? She asked quietly, once they were out of Chairman Lee's hearing. About our arrangement? Apparently, some people are suspicious. It doesn't matter. As long as we maintain consistent public appearances, the gossip will eventually die down. Just stay close to me tonight and look appropriately adoring. We need to project absolute unity and genuine affection. For the rest of the evening, they played their roles even more convincingly than usual. Park Jin-woo was attentive and affectionate in ways he never was, keeping his hand on her waist or back constantly, looking at her warmly, even kissing her forehead at one point in full view of the other guests. And Amara reciprocated, touching his arm, laughing at his remarks, gazing at him with manufactured adoration that she was disturbed to realize didn't feel entirely manufactured anymore. When they finally returned home that night, Amara was emotionally exhausted from the performance and the stress of the confrontation with Chairman Lee. Do you think he believes the rumors are true? She asked as soon as they were alone in the penthouse. Chairman Lee? Will he spread them? He'll probably spread them regardless of whether he believes them. He's a competitor who would love to damage my reputation. But as long as we maintain consistent public appearances, Most people will dismiss the rumors as baseless gossip. We just need to be more careful, more convincing in public. How much more convincing can we be? We already act like devoted spouses at these events. We act like polite spouses who tolerate each other. We need to act like spouses who are genuinely in love. That requires more intimacy, more physical affection, more convincing emotional connection. Can you do that? I think so, if you can. Then, starting at the next event, we increase the performance significantly. More touching, more obvious affection, more public displays that make it clear we're genuinely together. I'll need to touch you more, hold you closer, kiss you more than just the brief public greeting we usually do. Will that bother you? Will it bother you? You're the one who's emotionally unavailable and averse to intimacy. It's just a performance. As long as I'm clear that it's not real, I can manage it. But when they attended the next business dinner 3 days later, and Park Jin-woo put his arm around Amara's waist and pulled her close against his side, when he leaned down to whisper something in her ear that made her laugh, when he kissed her softly in front of the other guests, it didn't feel like just a performance anymore. At least, not to Amara. She was developing real feelings for him. Genuine, complicated, unwanted feelings for the cold, controlling man who'd bought her like an expensive acquisition and was now holding her close and looking at her like she actually mattered to him. This was bad. This was very bad. She wasn't supposed to actually fall for him. This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement that she would endure and then walk away from. But somewhere along the way, Park Jin-woo had stopped being just her husband in name and had started becoming someone she actually cared about. 1 year into the marriage, the halfway point of their 3-year arrangement, Amara finally admitted the truth to herself. She'd fallen in love with Park Jin-woo. It was absurd, completely illogical. He was still cold and emotionally unavailable. He still made her call him sir. He still treated their marriage like a business contract that he was managing. But he'd also shown her glimpses of genuine humanity and vulnerability. He'd started to confide in her about business pressures and family expectations. He'd asked her opinion on important decisions. He'd made her laugh with his dry sense of humor. He'd taken care of her when she'd gotten sick, turnabout from when she'd cared for him months earlier, bringing her medicine and soup and checking on her regularly. He'd become important to her, essential even. And she had no idea what to do about that because their arrangement had a fixed end date, and he'd made it very clear from the beginning that this wasn't a real marriage and would never become one. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said one evening during another increasingly common actual conversation during dinner. "You can ask. I may not answer, but you can ask. Do you ever think about what happens after the 3 years are up? You ever wonder if this arrangement could become something more real? If we could transition from a contract marriage to an actual relationship?" Park Jin-woo was quiet for a long time, his expression difficult to read. "Why do you ask? Are you developing feelings you didn't anticipate having? Answer the question. Do you ever think about it?" "Sometimes. Yes. I've thought about it more as the months have passed, and you've become more integrated into my life. But thinking about it and actually pursuing it are very different things. This arrangement has clear boundaries and a clear end date. Changing those parameters would complicate everything significantly." Would it, though? What if instead of getting divorced in 2 years, we just stayed married? Transition from a contract arrangement to a real partnership. Would that be so terrible? You don't actually want that. You want your life back, You want to return to Lagos and your career and your friends? You want freedom from this controlling arrangement and the man who's treated you like property for the past year. That's what you deserve and what you should have. I won't trap you in this arrangement indefinitely just because I've grown accustomed to your presence. What if I'm saying I want to stay? That I've fallen in love with you despite knowing I shouldn't? That the idea of leaving in 2 years and never seeing you again actually hurts? Park Jin-woo stood up from the table abruptly, his control visibly cracking. Don't say that. Don't tell me you love me. That's not what this arrangement is. That's not what I'm capable of giving you. I told you from the beginning, I'm cold, emotionally unavailable, incapable of the kind of romantic love you deserve. You agreed to this arrangement, understanding that. Don't change the terms now by developing feelings I can't reciprocate. Can't reciprocate or won't reciprocate, there's a difference. Both. I don't know how to love someone the way you're describing. I've spent 36 years building walls around myself so thick that nothing gets through. You're asking me to tear down those walls, but I don't know if I can. And even if I could, I'd probably just hurt you with my coldness and emotional limitations. You deserve better than what I can offer. Let me decide what I deserve. Stop making decisions for me about what I want or need. I'm telling you directly, I've fallen in love with you. I want to try to make this marriage real instead of just a temporary arrangement. I want to see if we can build something genuine together. What do you want? I don't know what I want. This wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to become important to me. I wasn't supposed to start caring whether you're happy or not. But somewhere along the way, you became essential to me in ways I didn't anticipate and don't know how to handle. So yes, part of me wants to try to make this real, but another part of me knows I'll probably destroy it through my emotional limitations and controlling nature. And I don't want to hurt you more than I already have. Then let's try. Let's see if this can become something real. We have 2 years left in the contract. Let's use that time to figure out if we can transition from a cold arrangement to an actual partnership. And if it doesn't work, if your emotional limitations are insurmountable, then we get divorced as originally planned. But at least we'll have tried. Park Jin-woo crossed the dining room and stood in front of her, looking down at her with an expression that was more vulnerable than she'd ever seen from him. If we try this, if we attempt to make this marriage real, you can't call me sir anymore. That dynamic only works in a purely transactional arrangement. If this becomes real, we have to be equals. Can you handle that adjustment after a year of the power dynamic we've maintained? I can handle it. Can you? Can you give up control and let this be an actual partnership? I don't know. But I'm willing to try. For you. Because you've become more important to me than maintaining perfect control over every aspect of my life. That's terrifying. But it's also the closest thing to love I've ever experienced. So yes, let's try. He kissed her then. Not a performative public kiss for show, but a real, genuine kiss that conveyed actual emotion and vulnerability. And Amara kissed him back, wrapping her arms around him, letting herself believe that maybe, possibly, this impossible arrangement could become something real after all. Over the following months, they worked on transforming their cold contract marriage into something more genuine. It wasn't easy. Park Jin-woo's controlling tendencies and emotional walls didn't disappear overnight. He still struggled with vulnerability, still defaulted to treating things transactionally, still kept her at arm's length emotionally more often than not. But he was trying. He started letting her into his private office and his bedroom instead of maintaining rigid separation of spaces. He started telling her about his day without her having to ask. He started touching her more. Casual, affectionate touches that weren't for public performance, but just because he wanted to. He even started saying, "I love you," occasionally, though the words clearly didn't come easily to him. "This is incredibly difficult for me," he admitted one evening as they sat together on the couch. Something they'd never done before the shift in their relationship. Opening up, being vulnerable, letting you see my weaknesses and limitations. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding this kind of intimacy because it terrifies me. But you're worth the fear and discomfort. You're worth trying to become a better version of myself. You're already better. You've changed so much from the cold, controlling man who made me call him sir and treated me like property. You're learning to be human again. That takes courage. Or stupidity. I'm not sure which. Courage. Definitely courage. 2 years into the marriage, 1 year left in the original contract, Park Jin-woo made a decision that shocked Amara completely. "I want to tear up the contracts," he said one morning over breakfast. "All of them. The agreements that structured this arrangement, the 3-year timeline, and the terms and obligations. I want to destroy all of it and start over." Why? Because those contracts represent a transaction, an arrangement where I bought you for $47 million to serve certain purposes for 3 years. That's not what this is anymore. This is a real marriage with a woman I genuinely love. A woman I want to spend my life with, not just 3 years. So the contracts need to go. We need to build this relationship on choice rather than obligation. Are you saying you want to stay married after the 3 years are up? That you want this to be permanent? I'm saying I don't want an end date on our marriage anymore. I don't want you leaving in a year because that's what we originally agreed to. I want you to stay because you choose to stay. Because you want to build a life with me. Because this has become real for both of us. But that choice has to be yours. Completely freely made without any obligation or pressure. So I'm tearing up the contracts. Your family's debt is forgiven regardless of what you choose. You're free to leave right now if that's what you want. Or to stay if you want to try to make this marriage work long term. No strings attached, no obligations, just choose. Amara felt tears forming in her eyes. You're giving me my freedom. My choice. After 2 years of control and obligation, you're letting me choose what I want. Yes, because I realize that the only way this works, the only way I can believe this is real, is if you're here because you genuinely want to be, not because you're trapped by contracts and debt. So choose, Amara. What do you want? Freedom to return to your old life? Or staying here with me to see if we can build something genuine together? I choose you. I choose us. I choose to stay and make this marriage real. Not because I'm obligated to, but because I love you and I want to see where this goes. You're not perfect. You're still cold sometimes, still controlling more often than you should be. But you're trying to be better. You're letting me in. You're becoming the kind of partner I can actually build a life with. So yes, I'm staying. By choice. Park Jin-woo pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. Thank you. For choosing me when you could have chosen freedom. For loving me despite my limitations. For believing I can become someone worth staying with long term. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice. You already are. You gave me the choice. That's the first genuinely unselfish thing you've done since I met you. That's growth. Don't expect too much growth too quickly. I'm still a work in progress. But I'm working on it. For you. For us. 3 years after their wedding, The original expiration date of their contract, Amara and Park Jin-woo renewed their vows in a small private ceremony that was nothing like the cold business transaction their original wedding had been. This time, they wrote their own vows. They invited friends and family, including Amara's parents, flying in from Lagos. They actually smiled and looked happy instead of treating it like a corporate event. They kissed like they meant it. "I know our relationship started in the worst possible way," Park Jin-woo said during his vows, his voice actually showing genuine emotion. "I treated you like an acquisition, something I bought to serve my purposes. I made you call me sir and follow my rules and live like a subordinate rather than a partner. I was cold, controlling, and emotionally abusive in ways I deeply regret. But somehow, despite everything I did wrong, you saw something worth saving in me. You helped me learn to be human again, to feel things, to love someone, to become a better version of myself. So I vow to spend the rest of our lives together, earning the choice you made to stay. To treat you as my equal partner, not my subordinate or my property. To opening my heart in ways that still terrify me. To building a genuine partnership based on love and choice rather than obligation and control. You saved me, Amara. Let me spend our life together, proving I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," Amara said, tears streaming down her face. "You just didn't know it. You spent so long building walls and controlling everything that you forgot what it felt like to actually connect with another person. But when I was crying in your office at 3 a.m., wrong context, but you know what I mean, and you made the choice to help me despite having no obligation to, that's when I first saw your humanity. The man underneath the cold CEO armor. And over these 3 years, I've watched you slowly let that human person emerge more and more. You're not perfect. You still have controlling tendencies. You still struggle with vulnerability. But you're trying. You're growing. And I love you for having the courage to change. So I vow to continue this journey with you. To be your partner in building a life that's more than just business and obligation. To love you through the difficult moments when your walls come back up. To remind you constantly that you're more than just a CEO. You're my husband, and you deserve happiness and love just like anyone else." 5 years after that cold business transaction wedding, Amara and Jin-woo had built a genuine partnership that neither of them had believed possible at the start. Jin-woo still worked long hours, but he came home to a wife he loved rather than to an empty apartment. He'd learned to share his life with someone, to be vulnerable, to let Amara see his weaknesses and trust that she wouldn't exploit them. He'd softened in ways that made him more human without making him less effective as a CEO. Actually, his board and investors had commented that he seemed more balanced and made better strategic decisions now that he wasn't operating from a place of cold isolation. And Amara had built a real life in Seoul. She'd started her own marketing consulting business, using her experience and education to help Korean companies expand into African markets. She had friends, community, and a purpose beyond just being Mrs. Park. She'd learned Korean fluently. She'd integrated into Jin-woo's family and social circles not as an obligatory addition, but as someone who genuinely belonged. "Do you ever regret it?" Jin-woo asked one evening as they sat together watching the sun set from their penthouse windows. "Those first 2 years when I treated you so terribly? Do you wish you'd refused the arrangement and found another way to help your family?" "Sometimes I think about how different my life would have been if I'd said no. I'd probably still be in Lagos doing marketing work, living a comfortable but ordinary life. But I also wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have discovered that I could fall in love with someone impossible. I wouldn't have learned that people can change and grow if they're given reason to. So no, I don't regret it. Even the terrible parts that hurt and dehumanized me, they were necessary to get us to where we are now. I'd endure it all again to end up here. You're more forgiving than I deserve. I put you through hell for the first year and a half. And then you gave me freedom and choice. You tore up the contracts and let me decide my own future. That single act erased a lot of the earlier damage. Not all of it. I still have moments where I remember how awful you were and get angry about it. But enough that I can focus on who you've become rather than who you were. I'm still working on becoming someone worthy of you. You already are. You're not perfect. You still have controlling moments and emotional walls. But you're trying. That's all I ask. Just keep trying. Always. I promise. 7 years after that first wedding, Amara gave birth to their daughter, a beautiful baby girl they named Grace, because she'd given Jinwoo grace when he deserved nothing but contempt, and that grace had transformed both their lives. She's perfect, Jinwoo said, holding his newborn daughter with a tenderness Amara had never seen from him before. I want to be a good father to her. Not like my father was to me. Cold, distant, only caring about business. I want to actually be present in her life. To show her affection and warmth. To let her know she's loved unconditionally, not just valued for what she can contribute to the family business. Will you help me figure out how to do that? I don't have good models for this. We'll figure it out together, like we've figured out everything else in our relationship, through trial and error and forgiveness and trying to do better tomorrow than we did today. That's parenting. That's marriage. That's life. Together. I like that word. We face things together now instead of me trying to control everything alone. Exactly. Together. As equals. As partners. That's what you promised in our second wedding vows, remember? To treat me as your equal partner, not your subordinate or your property. To build a genuine partnership. You've kept that promise better than I expected. Because you wouldn't let me break it. You called me out every time I slipped back into controlling behavior. You demanded to be treated with respect and dignity, even when it was uncomfortable for me to give up control. You made me become the partner you deserved, rather than the cold, transactional husband I started as. 10 years after that cold business transaction wedding that started their impossible relationship, Amara and Jinwoo were more genuinely happy together than either had believed possible at the start. Their daughter, Grace, was 3 years old. Bright, curious, bilingual in Korean and English. Loved unconditionally by both parents. Their son Daniel had been born 2 years ago, named after Jinwoo's late father, but raised completely differently, with warmth and affection instead of cold demands for perfection. They had a family, a real family built on love rather than obligation. Do you remember that first night? Amara asked one evening during their wedding anniversary dinner, a decade after their original ceremony. When you told me I had to call you sir from now on, that this was a business arrangement and nothing more, that I was basically an expensive acquisition you'd purchased? I try not to remember how terrible I was at the start. It's embarrassing in retrospect. I can't believe you actually stayed and gave me a chance to become better after I treated you that way. I stayed because underneath the cold, controlling CEO, I sensed there was a real person who'd forgotten how to be human, and I was right. You just needed someone who wouldn't give up on you even when you were being awful. Someone who would call you on your bullshit and demand better treatment. Someone who loved you enough to wait for you to figure out how to love back. You saved me. I was dying emotionally, not dramatically, but slowly, incrementally, becoming more hollow and isolated with each passing year, building wealth and power, but losing my humanity in the process. And then you appeared in my life. This brilliant, strong, beautiful woman who refused to be diminished by my coldness, who demanded to be treated like a perso even when I wanted to treat you like property, who somehow saw something worth loving in me when I couldn't see it myself. You saved me, Amara. Let me spend the rest of our lives together being grateful for that salvation. You saved yourself. I just gave you a reason to try. But I love you for trying, for changing, for becoming the kind of man I can genuinely build a life with, rather than just endure for 3 years. You're proof that people can change if they're given reason to. And you're proof that love can exist in the most unlikely circumstances, that a cold business transaction can become a genuine partnership, that someone purchased to fulfill obligations can become the most important person in your entire life. I love you, Amara, completely, in ways I didn't think I was capable of loving anyone. You taught me how. I love you too. My impossible, difficult, reformed, former controlling husband, whom I somehow fell in love with despite every reason not to. Here's to another 10 years of figuring this out together. They toasted to their future, a future neither had imagined possible on that cold, transactional wedding day 10 years ago when he'd told her she'd call him sir from now on. And she'd believed she was trapped in a loveless arrangement for 3 years before freedom. Sometimes the worst beginnings led to the best endings. Sometimes obligation became choice. Sometimes cold transactions became genuine love. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very stubborn and willing to fight for something that seemed impossible, a business arrangement could transform into the most authentic partnership of your life. All because someone refused to accept that cold transactions were enough. And someone else finally learned that being human was better than being powerful.